All right, welcome to the Bryce Eddy Show. So today my guest is, going to tell us how to defeat taxes, and I'm excited because, as you guys know, on the show I regularly talk about the abuse we have at the hands of our government, and many of our taxes were temporary things that became permanent things, and they lie to us all the time. So my guest, Rondi Lambeth, is going to talk to us about how to destroy the tax man. Rondi, how are you, brother?
I'm doing well. It's good to be alive, Bryce. Great
Yeah, no,
rainy
I'm
day
happy.
here in Bozeman.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have you on. You and I met at a car club and have become friends sort of naturally. And you told me a lot about what you do and gave me a little sneak preview on how you do some of these things. But I wanted to pick your brain and, kind of just expand the minds of the audience a little bit, that there are strategies that maybe your average CPA is unaware of, and wanted to talk to you a little bit about first your bio and background, because I'm always fascinated as to how people get to where they are. So if you give me a little bit of your story, and then let's talk about how you came to be the guru. I mean, I think they said from firefighter to financial guru online. So let's talk about it.
You know, um, I grew up in Southwest Idaho, so in Parma, Idaho, not too far from Boise, about an hour west. Grew up very poor. In fact, the shack that I lived in until I was 15 years old had no running water, no electricity. When we couldn't catch it or kill it, we would go to the M&W grocery store that's still there in Parma, and we would dig through the dumpsters for food.
Wow.
So my childhood was unlike most people's. And so half of the year we'd spend in that little shack, and the other half of the year we'd spend up in the mountains, a lot of times running from the government because my stepdad was a convicted murderer. He was mentally insane and he had a very vicious temper, and he would beat us kids. And then we'd show up to school all black and blue and black eyes. And then the cops would show up and then we'd run away for a while.
Wow.
So at 15, I got tired of living that life. He barely let us go to school. We were taught that rich people were evil, education was dumb. And so I left home at 15 and started moving around, did a little couch surfing in and out of foster care, eventually became my own ward of the state, if you will, and started working with an entrepreneur in Oregon, in John Day, Oregon, which is about 3 hours west of Boise, in Eastern Oregon. It's all loggers and ranchers. And I went to work for this man that taught me about money and about credit and about taxes. And one of the things that really stuck with me since I was 17 years old working with him was how much money you make is not as important as how much money you keep. And that's really stuck with me because I had no goals or aspirations in life. I just kind of was trying to figure it out and survive. And then 1992, I moved to Colorado. I heard that they were building this big airport and they were hiring for firefighters. And I wanted to be a fireman. My grandfather was a fireman in Boise, Idaho. My dad, my biological dad, was a fireman. And so I wanted to be a fireman. So I moved to Colorado, become a firefighter for Littleton, Colorado. And I spent 22 years there. And I saw a lot of stuff that I didn't want to see. And I got to do a lot of things that most people would kill to do. It was it was a great honor to be a fireman in Colorado. And I was also part of the National Guard. So I was part of the 1022nd Air Medical out of Cheyenne, Wyoming. So if I wasn't at the fire department, I was in a medevac helicopter. So, but with that time, I started learning about being a business owner. And as a firefighter, sometimes you have downtime. And I started reading this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And
Kawasaki. Yeah.
that I'd always had some type of entrepreneur spirit because I needed food and I wanted to survive. But that's when I really developed this entrepreneur spirit. And then in 2006, I was still a firefighter on top of the world, running a construction company. And at that time, I was in my 20s, multimillionaire. And I was still doing the fire department because I loved it. And then I got a call from my mom, and she was very upset. And I hadn't talked to my mom since I was a teenager. And my little brother, Zeke, who was also a firefighter, 21 years old, got a gun, shot and killed himself.
Oh, wow.
He
It's
broke
terrible.
up with some girl, said he'd never amount to anything. He's a loser. And it was primarily because collection companies were calling her and calling him. And he just couldn't handle it. So I eventually left the fire department and I started a nonprofit in 2007 called Fortress Credit Pro. And it turned into one of the most successful credit repair companies in America. It was the first paid on results credit repair. And the way it worked, Bryce, was people would come to me, bring their credit report. I would look at it. And then I would tell them how much it would cost to fix everything on their credit. And they'd sign an agreement. They'd leave. 30 days later, I'd call them up and say, your credit's fixed. And then I'd send them a bill. The bill they agreed to pay. And as you can imagine, people that didn't pay American Express generally didn't pay me either.
Wow.
So, but the 50% that did pay me, it was very rewarding. So I've done that now for 18 years, 18 and a half years.
Now,
And then it just,
I don't want to give, I don't want you to give away too much, free advice, but, number one, I mean, how did you learn that? How did you figure out like, okay, here's, there's a trick to this, or there's a puzzle to this, and then what were some of the steps? And again, I don't want to, I don't want you to give away
I'll
too
give it
much,
all away.
but all
I'll
right,
give it all away.
fair.
On my podcast, I give it all away. I've been doing a podcast now for 15 years, and it started out where I literally sat there and went through the code step by step, telling people how to fix their credit. And so it started evolving. The way I really learned this was I bought an entire set of law books on credit. I went to the National Consumer Law Center's website, so lcnc.com or .org, and I paid several $1,000s, and I bought these law books that were all cases where the credit bureaus lost, and the collection companies lost, and the banks lost these lawsuits. So then I reversed engineered my credit repair business based on the lawsuits that they lost. And because most credit repair, the way it works is you pay them a monthly fee for them to try to fix your credit.
Mhm.
And I was charging them after I fixed their credit. So I had to be much better than my competitors. And instead of it taking 18 months to 24 months, it would take literally 30 to 90 days to fix someone's credit.
Wow.
And what I didn't realize at first was I was charging considerably more money, but I would do the work. I'd only have to work on the client's credit report for 1 to 3 months. And then I would let them make me payments for 2 to 3 years versus the opposite, waiting 2 to 3 years to fix your credit and billing monthly. So with the radio show that I started, Your Credit Matters radio show and podcast, I got this call one day from this gentleman, and he said his name was Brian. And I was listening to him, and I was like, man, I was on the way to the radio station. I was like, man, he sounds so familiar. And I said, is this Brian Tracy, the author?
Oh,
He
yeah,
goes,
he's got a distinct voice.
yeah. He goes, yes, it is. How'd you know? I'm like, I was literally listening to your CD on the way to the radio station. So his wife listened to my radio show, and they lived in La Jolla. And whenever I share personal information, these guys have told the world, on podcasts. Guys like Andy Frisella. I fixed Andy's credit back in 2012. Now Andy's worth about $4 billion. He's the founder of 75 Hard and First
Yeah.
Form. He was broke, and he tells everybody he's broke. And then I fixed his credit. So what had happened was Brian had called me, and he had filed his taxes, and the state of California came in and said, no, we don't believe you. In fact, we think you made more money. And so we're going to lien you. And they liened all of his houses, and he couldn't refinance. So this was like 2009, 2010, somewhere there. And come to find out, Tony Robbins used the same accountant, and the CPA couldn't help him. And I had fixed his credit within about 72 hours. So, of course, he told a CPA that had been trying this thing for years. And then they told Tony Robbins, and then it just kind of spread throughout the celebrity and athlete world. So with that, it started sticking with me again, what Wally taught me. How much money you make is not as important as how much you keep. And I was working with these NFL players and these NBA players and other celebrities, and I'm seeing they're making millions of dollars and they have nothing. Everything's rented. Their houses are rented, their cars are rented, uh, their watches that they wear generally are loaned to them. And so they make lots and lots of money, but they keep hardly anything. And then the money they do make, they end up paying a lot of taxes on it. So I started reading a lot of tax books and I started having tax attorneys on my radio show. And that's where it started developing. And since then, it's just grown. I spend a tremendous amount of time reading tax code and corporate code and going to conferences. And because I'm not a CPA, I'm not stuck in that box.
I love that.
If you ask me, can I deduct this? I would respond with ask better questions, because you should never ask, can you deduct it? It should be, how can I deduct it?
That's right.
And if you ask a CPA, can I pay my kids tax deductible and they don't pay any income tax on it? They'll be like, no, you can't do that. Or I saw one the other day. He was at a golf course and he's like, I get asked all the time, can you write off golf? And the answer is no. Well, that's not true. The answer is, can you just go to the golf course and write it off? No, but can you go to the golf course and actually write off the golf if it has a business purpose? And the answer is yes. So, long answer to your question, how I got started in it. It was, I think, God just opened the doors for me, and I was walking through the right doors.
I love that. I love that. That's fantastic. So you talk about, in our brief conversations, you talked about not really owning anything. And I found that interesting. Explain that concept a little bit, and how you discovered some of the, I was going to say cheat code, but we're not cheating here.
Yeah.
But explain a little bit of how you came to understand just a different paradigm of how to look at how we move through this world, and how we kind of engage in the stream of commerce.
Yeah. For 17 years, now, I'm sorry, 18 years now, I've been helping people with credit issues, money issues, judgments, tax liens, collections, charge-offs. And again, knowing now, if I'd have known 18 years ago, the 100,000 plus clients that I've helped would have been helped a little bit differently. I was just cleaning up their credit. And what I've learned is primarily most business owners, 93%, according to Forbes anyway, 93% of business owners pay more in taxes than legally required to pay. And the second largest threat to a business is frivolous lawsuits. And so when I say own nothing, control everything, I'm not the creator of that term. They say that John D. Rockefeller created it. I don't know if there's any proof of that, but let's just go with it. Own nothing, control everything. What most people think he meant was put everything in a trust. And then since you're the grantor to the trust, you don't own it anymore. But the way the laws work now is if you grant all of your assets into trust, you can't control it anymore. So you don't own it, but you have no control. So own nothing, control everything. What I like to do is use corporate law along with the trust and using multiple layers. So you have sole proprietorships, LLCs, partnerships, and a C Corp. And ultimately what happens is you have small ownership in your LLCs, your operating accounts, your bars, your cigar shops, your restaurants, your mechanic shops, your carpenter shops. And if you control 1% of those LLCs, under the law, you are not the owner. Just like Elon Musk is not the owner of Tesla, founder of Tesla, largest shareholder of Tesla, in charge of Tesla, but he doesn't own it. Jeff Bezos does not own Amazon. And so all the companies that I control and all the companies that I help my clients control, they don't actually own them under the law. They'll own 1% of the company, but they control the company. Now, you'll ask, well, who owns the rest of it? A series of LLCs. Well, who owns those LLCs? Well, they'll have 1% ownership in those as well. And ultimately, what happens is a C Corp owns all of it, a private holding company. And my client and myself, I own a large majority of the shares in the C Corp. And because it's a C Corp, it's shares, and I'm the director. Once I set up the account, what I'll do is I'll take the shares, and what I did with mine is I took the shares and I conveyed those shares and I put those in an irrevocable trust. And because the shares of the C Corp are in irrevocable trust, I no longer own that C Corp. I'm in control of the C Corp. I control all of the LLCs underneath the C Corp. I control all of the operating and working LLCs under that C Corp. But I don't own any of it, but I control it all. Under the irrevocable trust, I put my shares in there. So I'm not in control of the trust. And because the trust only owns shares, the trust doesn't have to pay taxes. And what most people do, Bryce, is they'll put a revocable trust at the top of their structure. And that was cool up until March 29th, 2024. And that's when the laws changed. You can't have businesses that you control inside a revocable trust anymore. You don't get any, there is zero asset protection in a trust. And most people believe that if they put their house in a trust, they put their business in a trust, a revocable trust, that there's asset protection, and there's not. It's really just camouflage. You know, I kind of describe it as it's the world's greatest camouflage. You can put your business and your house inside the trust, and nobody knows who owns the trust. But if you get sued, if Bryce Eddy gets sued, they're going to ask they're going to ask in court for you to show what you own. And now you have to disclose that you own the trust and you have the house inside the trust. And so that it's hidden, but you still own it. And so what I like to do is own nothing, control everything, with a series of LLCs and C Corps and a trust, and using corporate law to do all of that versus just trust law.
All right. So if we're talking LLCs, now the LLCs, let's imagine, we got a restaurant group, for a hypothetical, and
Yeah.
inside, in the restaurant group, owns a series of, different concepts, different things. Let's say the restaurant group owns a cigar lounge. Let's say, there's a bunch of different things. So you essentially would each of those, restaurants be LLCs under that? What you're saying a series of LLCs. So is it, different business models? Like describe a setup in some way with a practical, business model that the audience can grasp.
Yeah. So we'll say a cigar shop. Instead of being a cigar shop with 3 members, and I'm going to give you a little tax tip here. 96% of IRS agents are not legally allowed to audit multi-member LLCs. I'll repeat that. 96% of
Interesting.
IRS agents are not legally allowed to audit multi-member partnerships or LLCs. So if you have 3 members, a minimum of 3 members in your LLCs, it's now a partnership. 96% of the agents can't audit you. So just doing that one move will eliminate the likelihood of you ever being audited. So now we'll go back to the corporate side. So instead of it being, let's say it's an LLC and there's 3 business partners, 3 members of the LLC. You would say it 33 and a third, 33 or 34% to one, 33 and 33 to the other. It's kind of how most people would do it, or some type of percentage like that. Anytime you go over 20%, you're the owner of the LLC. So anytime over 20%, you're the owner, which means if you get in a car accident, they can come after everything you own, you personally. And if you own more than 20% of a company, they can go after the company. If the company gets sued and you're a 20% or more owner, they can come after you personally. Most people do not do the paperwork correctly to get the actual LLC protection. Most people have a single member LLC, or they'll do an LLC with their spouse.
Right.
And the courts just see it as just you. It's just your alter ego. If it was you and two other people and you're not related and you're just business partners, you get a little bit more protection. I met with a woman recently that she's been a successful business owner here in Boise, a real estate developer, very successful, 20 plus years. And I asked to see her corporate paperwork. And I said, hey, where's your minutes at and your bylaws? She's like, oh, I don't have any of that. I'm like, what about your operating minutes? I don't have any of that. She literally 20 plus years ago just went to the state of Idaho, incorporated a business, got the name, and that was it. She's never done minutes. She's never done bylaws. She has no operating agreement, and it's just her. And so that she has no protection there whatsoever. So back to your original question, how would I do it? Is I would, if you had a bar, I would make it to where I was a 1% owner, my business partner was a 1% owner, and a Wyoming LLC owned the other 98%, or some type of percentage like that, where the Wyoming LLC, the business hub that owned all of the LLCs underneath. So maybe there's a restaurant, there's a bar, there's a mechanic shop, or whatever all those other businesses are. It's all owned by a Wyoming LLC. So the majority of the companies are owned by that Wyoming LLC, where the members, like yourself, that also the managers, own very little percentage of operating businesses. And what that does is if the bar gets sued, somebody overserves, or maybe it's not the real lawsuits that you worry about, it's the frivolous lawsuits. Somebody gets a DUI, and so they try to blame it on the bartender. And so there's LLC, the bar gets sued. If you're only a 1% owner, you can stand in front of the judge and say, I don't own this thing. I'm just the manager. I don't even get paid. So I'm basically a volunteer. And because the Wyoming LLC owns it, they could try to sue the Wyoming LLC, but the Wyoming LLC has no liability. And if they did sue the Wyoming LLC, and the reason I choose Wyoming LLCs to set up most of my structures, there's three reasons, Bryce. Number one, it's non-reporting. If you go to Idaho, you go to Secretary of State and you type in ABC liquor store, or ABC bar rather, you're going to see who all the members are, the managers are, and the owners are. They share everything. Most states share this. Wyoming doesn't share it. So if you go to Wyoming and you type in ABC bar, you're going to see the organizer, who's just some person they had paid $50 to set it up. So there's no way for them to know who actually owns the LLC. Number two, there's no state income tax. So you don't have to file any tax returns ever. You can make $1 billion and never pay any income tax to the state of Wyoming. A lot of these states like Texas and Florida and Washington, there's no personal income tax. Nevada is another one. No personal income tax, but there is corporate tax. So they're not taxed. Wyoming's the only one that's non-tax. So it's non-reporting and non-taxed. And maybe just as important is non-charging. And what charging means is if you get sued and you lose, the courts can take charge of your company. The courts can take charge of your checking account, of your assets. They can take charge of the contracts you have. They can take charge of your accounts receivables. And they can issue judgments and drain your bank accounts. They can force you and take charge and force you to sell assets if you get sued and lose. In Wyoming, there's no such thing. So you could get sued. They could get a judgment for $1 billion against you. And there is nothing the courts can do. All
Wow.
they can put a lien on your business, and who cares? Because the operating LLC that's doing the business, that has all the liability, has no assets. Own nothing, control everything. So it's you control that LLC, but that LLC doesn't have anything in it. Who owns everything? The LLC above it.
Wow, that's that's brilliant. I love clever, busy bees, and you seem to be one of them. Yeah, it's interesting, and I'd love to pick your brain and about some of the things that Idaho specifically does, because I'd be curious as to your take, because there's all kinds of requirements. I mean, we're mentioning bar. You own a liquor license here, or you own. I mean, they have so many protections against doing anything clever. And by that I mean just most of it doesn't make any practical sense if you're going to be building a business here, and a lot of it has to do with hangover liquor licenses and things that are ancient laws here in Idaho that nobody even really knows how to navigate or straighten out. So not to get too specific because this is a national show, but I love guys who know how to pick apart the puzzle, right? Know also how to create sort of a defensive shield around you. I loved your tip on the multi-member LLCs, because yeah, just that alone right there puts you down to the bottom of the pile for who's going to be a likely suspect to be audited and just harassed by our government agencies. So it's funny, I've had people who I'm a Christian kid, right? Preacher's kid, and I've had people who believe that okay, well, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, but Caesar has long since lied and cheated us, and I am not of the mind to be giving Caesar more than what he is absolutely due. And I think it's brilliant that we push back and figure out ways to legally outsmart them. And that's what I think you're doing is just so brilliant. um how do people right now take advantage of these strategies? How do we follow you? Give us your podcast address and everything else, because this is awesome.
Easiest way to find me is probably social media, just Rondi Lambeth. Make sure that the Rondi Lambeth you follow has the blue check mark. It's not an ego thing that I'm verified. It is a protection thing, because there's lots of scammers that will sell you crypto under my name. It is not me selling the crypto. So, or rondilambeth.com. And then the podcast is School of Wealth. And on the podcast, it started out in 2010 as a credit repair called Your Credit Matters Radio. That's how Andy Frisella found me now 13 years ago, was through the podcast. And back then it was a radio show that I just uploaded to Apple. I didn't even know what a podcast was. I just would upload it. And it was an actual radio show that was nationally syndicated on 42 different stations. And so School of Wealth, they can find me there. And on the school, it's kind of evolved a little bit to where it's not just about credit anymore. It's about asset protection, maximizing your credit, minimizing your debt, minimizing your taxes, multiplying your assets, and protecting them. One thing that I would like to bring up, Bryce, is, CPAs are great at filing taxes, and they're important. It's very important to have them. It's very important to have a good bookkeeper. But you shouldn't go to a CPA for tax advice. That would be like Tom Brady calling a timeout and running over to the referee, the guy that knows the rules, that's there to enforce the rules, and then asking the referee, how do I beat the 49ers? Or how do I beat the other team? And that's what most entrepreneurs do. And that's why Forbes, after 10 years, Forbes did a study with tens of thousands of business owners. And they came back and said 93% of business owners paid more in taxes than legally required. And it's because they're asking CPAs for tax advice. And they shouldn't be. They should be asking tax strategists for tax advice. And one of the things, the very simple things to write off would be like your Augusta Rule. And that's a very simple strategy that any taxpayer can do this. So a lot of people think our country was founded and created because of taxes, and that was a small portion of it. But we didn't have income tax until 1862. Who was the president that created it? The very first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln. He created income tax. And it was only on the top 1%. So is anybody in today's equivalent that made over $300,000? And it was 1%. And then in 1909, they created corporate tax. And in 1911, all the states jumped on board and started with personal income tax. And it's been as high as 94%. So I heard on Joe Rogan's podcast recently, he had Bernie Sanders on there, and Bernie Sanders was saying, yeah, I want to tax people 90%. And people think that'll never happen. We used to have a 94% tax bracket. It wasn't that long ago. We had a 70% tax bracket back in the late 70s. So taxes are our largest expense in life, and we should be doing everything we can do to legally reduce our income taxes. And if 93% of business owners pay more than their fair share, and it's on average of $56,000. So one of the things that I teach the clients, and I'll teach your listeners, is it's called the Augusta Rule. That's the nickname. But if you want to look up the code, it's IRS code 280A, as in alpha, 280A. And it says that any taxpayer, so you do not have to be a business owner to do this, any taxpayer is allowed to rent their residence, so where they live, whether it's a house, a condo, a boat, a motorhome, if that's their residence, they're allowed to legally rent it 14 days a year. So that's 2 weeks out of the year, and not pay any income tax on it. And you don't have to own the house to do this. And the most expensive rental I can find is in Aspen. It's $57,700 a night. So it ends up being about, for that time, it's $375,000. So that's about the limit that I can find per week. So if you're a business owner and you look at this, this is not a loophole. It's tax code, IRS code 280A. If anyone can do this, that means you, Bryce, can rent your house to your cigar shop if it has a business purpose, for annual meetings, to meet with the shareholders, to put
Brilliant.
on and I brought up cigars because I know you have a cigar shop. So you could have 14 days a year, you could bring your best clients or people you want to have as a client, investors, you could bring them to your house, and the cigar shop could pull as much as $375,000 out of the business account, put in Bryce Eddy's bank account, and you would pay no income tax on it whatsoever.
Brilliant. Wow.
In fact, the IRS code says, if you do this, do not tell us you've done this. It's the only where in the code, 75,000 pages of documents. It's the only place in the code that says, if you make money, don't tell us you made money. We don't want to know. So anyone can do this. And so my daughter, who's a nurse in Las Vegas, she's a renter. Earlier this year, there was a Super Bowl in Las Vegas. So what the apartment, or not the apartments, the hotels were like $1,500 a night. So I said to her, I said, and she's got a 5-bedroom house, and she's not far from the stadium. I said, Toya, why don't you rent your house for the next week and come to Idaho on vacation, and we'll go snowboarding? And she's like, well, I'll just have to pay tax on it. I'm like, no, you won't. So she was able to rent her house for $2,000 a night for 7 nights. She was able to collect $14,000. Her rent's only $2,000 a month. So in 1 week, she was able to pay for 7 months of her rent. She doesn't have to pay any income tax on it. Now, maybe you don't want to have strangers come into your house, but hey, if it pays for a couple vacations for you, maybe it's worth it. And if you're a business owner, you just rent it to your business. Now there's things you have to do. There's paperwork, and you got to have comps, and you got to have an actual rental agreement, and you actually have to move the money, and you actually have to do something for the business to make it work. And that's where I come in. I make sure all the paperwork's right. But there's just one little tip, if you will, that
I love it.
every single CPA knows this. And yet, did your CPA ever tell you this?
No.
$375,000 a week, 750 grand that you could be taken out of your bar. Now, in Idaho, the most expensive rental property is $28,000. So, but most of my clients here in Boise, they're doing $8,000 to $10,000 per day. So about $100,000 to $140,000 a year for the Augusta Rule, that they're no longer having to pull out via a distribution or a salary. And now they're pulling out 100 grand a year tax free.
Wow. Brilliant. Well, listen, man, that alone right there was, worth having you on. You're also a brilliant storyteller, and I appreciate you. And I'm so glad to know you and to be friends. So let's keep this going. I want to grab you, ply you with some cigars, and pick your brain on a few other things. But I appreciate you, Rondi. Thank you. Say one more time how we can follow you.
I think anywhere on social media at Rondi Lambeth or rondilambeth.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you. To God be the glory, and we are out. Hey, thank you for watching or listening to this show. If you are someone who listens to us on the podcast apps, please go to our Rumble channel. Even if you're not going to watch us there, we'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. We want to boost those numbers up and make sure that channel continues to grow. But again, thank you so much for listening to us.